Hello, Author Nation. I am Melody Ann, and this is your place if you want to be a nonfiction author. We support authors from idea to published book. So if that's something you're interested in, join Author Nation at authornationtube.com/join. It is also scrolling across the screen and it is in the description. Today we are talking about writing faster and writing more accurately. Don't we all want some of that, right? I know I do. So we have a guest, William H. Koenecke, a retired university professor from Murray State University. He holds 5 degrees and has 45 years of educational experience. He has taught at 3 universities during his career, as well as high school, and he's an author and a book publisher. He has 1 book out and a second on the way. Please welcome Professor Koenecke. Hello, how are you today?
Hi, Melanie. How are you doing? I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. So your students used to call you Dr. K.
Correct. Yes, they couldn't pronounce Koenecke, so they just called me Dr. K.
Dr. K. I like that. I think Dr. K is a great name. Absolutely. And Koenecke, I was looking up because I was really curious, means royal. So you have some royalty in you, just so you know. All right. So you wrote a book about English. So, I mean, I think a lot of people out there might assume that you were an English professor.
Yes, that's an interesting story. When I was growing up, I didn't have a very good background in English. I didn't think it was important, and several interesting stories. I just didn't think it was necessary. Then when I got into college and started in my graduate programs and I became a principal and a superintendent, all that stuff, I found out that yes, English grammar, punctuation, and so forth is extremely important. And so I kind of taught myself English grammar, punctuation, and so forth. It was a long process, and I still am a work in progress. English is what would you call it? People use English. For example, you used to couldn't end a sentence with a preposition, but now you can. And used to, when you had a single subject, when you did a pronoun, you had to do his or her, but now it's permissible to use their. So English has changed and it's not as strict as it used to be. However, I still think you should do the formal English when you do resumes and that type of thing, because it shows that you have an appreciation for being educated and being able to communicate succinctly and clearly. So I think it's extremely important, and a lot of people just don't take the time to do it anymore. So my book is a simple book, a guidebook on how to do it easily and correctly.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm an editor, and what I find sometimes is I'm going through people's books, and there are sentences that are vague, ambiguous. You know, I don't really understand what they mean, and of course, they're in their own heads, and they know what they mean because they live in their own heads.
Right.
But for the reader, it's like I'm not quite clear, and a little bit of punctuation can help bring a lot of clarity, right?
Correct.
So yeah, absolutely.
Right, and commas give a lot of people trouble. And on my in my book on page 74, there's a way to never ever make a comma mistake again. And I'll tell you the secret. There's something like 30 rules of commas, or 40, depending on the author. And some of them are very similar, but there's really about 6 basic rules that are never ever wrong. And if you memorize those 6 basic rules, and you know their format as to what it is, and you see a sentence that fits one of that comma-wise, then it's probably correct. If you see a sentence that doesn't fit one of those comma standards, what do you do about it? What would you do?
Yeah, exactly. Well, what did you teach? Let's jump into what did you, because I'm curious. If you're writing about English, but that's not what you taught. We'll get into your book in just a minute, but what did you teach?
I taught high school chemistry for 3 years, and then I became a principal at age 23 and then a superintendent at age 34. So when I got to college, I taught education courses. I taught the beginning teacher education course for students who wanted to be teachers. And then on the very end of the program, where they did student teachers, I have supervised student teachers, chemistry teachers, biology teachers, physics teachers, English teachers, social studies teachers. the whole gambit. Matter of fact, I even had a couple of art teachers, which I don't know why they gave me art teachers because I'm not good in art, but I had a ton of student teachers, and I found that even the ones at the end of the career still had grammar problems and punctuation problems. A lot of
Yeah.
them at the first of the career did, but there were still some that just did not do well in English grammar punctuation. So it's pretty
Yeah.
important, I thought, to give them some way to do a guidebook where they look these things up and get them correct.
Yeah. So you said that initially, you weren't great with grammar and punctuation, and you weren't even sure it was important. And then you started teaching people. So I'm sure you did a lot of reading, you did a lot of grading of essays and
Right,
papers,
right,
and a lot of writing for yourself. You're a
right,
PhD. That's a lot of writing. What
right.
did you learn about writing throughout your career? Like, what are some really important things you learned just about writing?
Well, I learned one thing is that you need to proof your work. Not only do you need to proof your work, but you need to hire someone or get someone that's an English teacher or so forth to also proof your work, because if you don't proof your work, you tend to read something that's not there, that's incorrect, that you would catch or a proofreader would catch. And so that's very
Yeah.
important. And I found out that, like real estate, there's three things important in real estate: location, location, location. And in writing, it's practice, practice, and practice. But
Yeah.
you have to make sure you practice correctly. And so you look up things you don't understand, and then you learn as you go along. And that's how you improve. You get a mentor, you get someone good in English to be your buddy and to proofread stuff. And it's amazing how much things sound better after you proof them several times. A
Yeah.
friend of mine was one of my mentors and has written 50 books. And he told me when he first started writing, he proofed things 10 times. And I said, "Well, do you still do that?" He said, "No, I just proof three times now, but I always have a professional proofreader read my final copy before it's printed." And he's even then mistakes are made,
Yeah.
but not nearly as many.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. And when people come in to work with me as an editor, they think I'm going to edit their book. But what they often walk away with is they become better writers, because when I see patterns, I let them know what the patterns are. Whether it's overuse of a certain word, or a grammar structure that they tend to use too often, or uh, a misplaced comma that they do over and over again. And so when you come in and you get your work edited, a good editor won't just edit your work, they'll also help you with your writing. At least that's my opinion. And as an editor, that's what I want to help people with.
Right. Well, there are two kinds of editors. There's the people who do the forms and do the structure, and there's also the people that do the grammar. And sometimes it's great if you can have one person do both. But I found that a lot of times
Yeah.
it's a second piece of work that helps. You might get a structure editor
Yeah.
and a story editor, and then you get a person come along and do the grammar, because they don't always do the same thing.
Yeah. I
Both important.
agree.
They're
And
both
and
important.
even and what I say to people, because I'll only do one type, I won't do both.
Mhm.
And what I say to people is, just because I'm capable doesn't mean I should. You should have two different sets of eyes on the same book. And that's far better than having one person trying to do everything. Right.
And there are some really really good applications. Grammarly is one that does a pretty good job. There's a couple others. They're not perfect either, but they a lot of times suggest different phrases to replace. And I've used Grammarly, and there's a couple others that I've used, but and Word doesn't always catch all the mistakes either. Microsoft
Yeah.
Word, especially
Yeah.
grammar errors, they're
Yeah.
not real good on grammar errors. So you
Yeah.
really need a human eyes to do grammar, because there's an art to that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at some point in your career, you realized that people really needed help with writing, and that turned into a book. So how did it turn into a book? Why did you decide to write the book?
Well, first thing I noticed when I was superintendent, I interviewed a lot of people, teachers, some English teachers that would submit their application. I always made them do a narrative where they had to do about some topic like their educational philosophy or whatever. And I asked them to write it longhand or cursive, not to type it. and I'd have them do like a paragraph or two, and it was amazing how many of those they had errors in them, either spelling errors, grammar errors, and I let them have one or two errors because no one's perfect. But they had all kind of errors. I just eliminated them because I didn't want someone that was that deficient in grammar to be a teacher for me because they would not be a good teacher in most cases. But there were exceptions, of course. But so I started with resumes, and then when I got to college, I found teaching college kids that many of them were terrible. You asked me about my worst paper, and that's interesting. I had a young man, freshman in college, and had passed English in high school, and he wrote a paper for me about 2 or 3 pages, and there was a capital letter at the first word and a period at the end, and everything else had no punctuation, no commas or anything. Worst paper I've ever seen, and so I said something to him about it. He said, "What's wrong with it?" I said, "It's terrible." And so I gave him some suggestions, but he ended up getting out of education because he was so terrible in grammar and writing. Plus, his paper didn't make any sense. It was just a jumble of facts that he had put together without any organization at all. It just, I was amazed that he got through high school English with doing that, but he did.
Yeah, I think that's a disservice to the student.
And you know, they don't teach grammar that much in high school anymore. I used to have student teachers,
Yeah.
and the English teacher, I had several in English. And I said, "When do they have the grammar?" "Oh, we don't teach that anymore." I said, "You don't teach grammar anymore?" "No." I said, "It's important what you say, and the grammar can get anybody to fix that." I said, "Well, it definitely is important what you say, but you really need to have someone proof it, and you need to do the grammar because it makes you look terrible, and it's not a good impression if you can't do grammar." But now they are changing. I've noticed that a few high schools and colleges are going back to some grammar because this is a problem across all education. Most people have trouble
Mhm.
with grammar. There are a few exceptions, but there are a lot of people that
Yeah.
can't do
Yeah.
grammar for
And
some reason. They say they haven't had it. I don't know. Teachers say they have it in the middle school, but the high school they say they already know it, but they don't.
yeah. So who is this book for? Is it for high schoolers then?
It's for really middle school through high school through college, and really for parents and grandparents to buy the book for them if they need it. So it's really that's the audience I'm looking at, and I have sold several books, but of course I always want to sell more. But I gave away quite a few books as an advertisement, free books to people. So I'm hoping they'll buy my second book.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Tammy Yu has just said, I teach college courses, and it's awful. So you have someone who is in full agreement with you that we really need to get more grammar in the high schools. It's interesting what you said too. It's like saying, well, we don't need to teach grammar. Somebody can fix it for them. Well, not if we're not teaching it to someone in high school. So if we don't actually teach people grammar, there will be no one to fix other people's grammar because you haven't taught it, right? So it's an interesting argument, that, right? Um,
You want to find someone that knows grammar to proof your stuff. You just certainly don't want someone that's in the same boat you are that can't do grammar to proof your stuff because they're not going to catch some mistakes. But it's
exactly.
interesting in our college, unless they've changed it, they did not require English students to take a grammar class. It was an optional class. And
Interesting.
the rationale was that the kids already know how to do it. So I told some of the professors in the English department that you might want to reconsider this because there's a lot of kids coming out that want to be English teachers in middle school
Yeah.
and high school that are not doing well in grammar. And
Yeah.
they could hardly believe it. I said, "Well, I'll be glad to share the papers with you," but it didn't really
Yeah.
go too far. So I don't know if they changed that after I left or not, but I
Yeah.
think it's still the problem most every place.
Yeah. Interesting because the university I went to, now I live in Canada, and so it may be a little different, but the university I went to, every first year student had to sit and write an essay. Those
Mhm.
essays were graded, not graded in like, it wasn't part of a course, we didn't get a grade, but it was either a pass or fail. And if you passed, you were fine. If you failed, you had to go to remedial English classes, in order to stay at the university. So that was, and I have kids in university now, and none of them had to do that. None of them had to write papers. But when I started, everyone wrote an essay.
Some schools still do that, especially your higher level schools. You have to write a college essay.
Yeah.
And I was on a webcast from Denise Thomas, and she helps students write those essays that are submitted to these universities. And you're right, it's pass or fail. But a lot of those essays, if they don't do that well, they don't get admitted. And I don't know if Mercer State does that or not. I don't know. Some schools don't do that. They just submit everyone. But it's a good idea, because then you can correct those deficiencies.
Yeah. So how is your book structured? Let's pop back to the book. I'm really curious about the book. How is it structured?
My book's a little bit different. It's broken down into like the different types of grammar, subject, verb, agreement, pronouns, nouns, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the back of the book, I have several appendixes that have answers to the questions of different quizzes. So almost every chapter has a quiz. You take the quiz, go back to the back of the book, and not only does it give you the correct answer, but tells you why and what page it's on, so you can go back and look at it. And so that's one interesting. Also, I have a chapter called Yellow Pages of Homonyms. It has all things like affect, effect, and all those type of words that you get confused, like lie and lay. Lie and lay is real easy. You lie down to sleep and you lay a book on a table, but you get them mixed up. And one of the number one problems that people have, they get IT apostrophe S and ITS mixed up. And they're really simple. One's possessive and one's not. But for some reason, it's one of the number one mistakes that people make.
Interesting. That's interesting. And it's IT apostrophe S can be it is or it has, actually.
It can be, yes, it can be. It is or it has.
But ITS is the possessive without the apostrophe, right? So yeah, absolutely. Interesting. So what is the promise of the book? So I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent, I've got a middle schooler. What is my kid getting out of it?
Well, the promise of the book is that it shows you how to write succinctly and correctly, and does it in a simple way. For example, the thing I gave you about page 74 on the comma thing, it tells you the different ways you can get commas correct, and you don't want to put too many commas in, and you don't want to put no commas in. You want to put just the correct number in. And also, there's a couple of things on tips on like who and whom. A lot of people miss who and whom, and that's really pretty simple. Either him or her, or she or him, and he. And then if it's the singular, it's usually who. If it's plural, or it's usually whom. Not always though. Then the third rule is just rewrite the sentence. Don't even use him or who, and then you'll never miss who or him. So,
right.
But there's lots of tips like that in there that are just simple tips that, you ever heard of fanboys? You ever heard of a thing called fanboys? Fanboys are the conjunctions between two compound sentences, and fanboy stands for and, nor, but, or, why, or so. And if you have two compound sentences together, you put a comma after the first sentence, and then you put a so or a but or that fits that sentence, and people a lot of times leave that comma out.
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that. But fanboys is a really easy way to remember those 6 conjunctions. Stuff like that. Some I've developed myself, and some I have found in other sources, but a lot of those type tips in there.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Really more of a guidebook than really to read. You go up the index, having trouble with something, you go up the index and look for commas, and it tells you on what page the commas are, and you can turn back and refresh your memory, and then take a quiz, then look and see how you've done. So it's a little different. A lot of books have some answers in the back of the book, but mine has all the answers in the back of the book.
Right. It's interesting. And when you talked about who and whom, it struck me that, who is the subject and whom is the object.
Right.
But even like when you going back to like how we're educating kids, if you talk to an English speaker and say, well, who, someone says, when do I use who and when do I use whom? If I say who is the subject and whom is the object, those two words, subject, object, sometimes native speakers are like, well, that's not how I learned it, right? I learned it more intuitively. But if you understand the the concept behind it, like what is the subject and what is the object of a sentence, then when you get who and whom mixed up, you can, someone can sort you out faster, if you know what I mean.
Yes, and you just look at the very end of the book. There's a page on who and whom that you should never ever miss who or whom again. But I don't usually use who and whom that much. But I leave
No,
it
people
out.
don't use whom very often.
Yeah,
With
like
whom do you wish to
semicolons.
speak?
A lot of people use way too many semicolons.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So what are some of the most common mistakes you see?
Well, it's on the it's. Let me look at my pages in the book here. I've got two different lists that I found the same thing here. Uh, no comma after the first element in a sentence. That's one of the common errors. Now, if the sentence is short, you don't need to put a comma, like yes, comma, we are going to the ball game. Probably don't need a comma there. But if it's a longer sentence and you put yes, you need a comma after that. Second one is vague pronoun reference, like not doing a pronoun correctly. No comma in a compound sentence with the fanboys. The wrong word in a sentence, like lie and lay mixed up, those type of things. Unnecessary shift in tense. People go from one tense to another.
Yeah.
Sentence fragments. Let's see. Lack of subject verb agreement. That sometimes is tough because sometimes people want to use the subject, which is object of preposition, and that's not the subject used of the sentence. It's another subject, and those are some of the common ones. And in all fairness, we have some people who write real well, and they don't make those mistakes. But
Yeah.
just a lot of people that have those common errors that they make.
Yeah. Pronoun reference is something I see in books when people are writing as well. When I'm editing, what they'll do is they'll say, Bill, and they'll go on, blah, 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 blah. And then they'll say Fred and Melody, blah, 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 blah. And then they'll say he or him.
But you don't know which Bill or Fred they're talking
right?
about.
So Bill or Fred. And what I always tell people is when you get to the pronoun, start going backwards until you find the name. And if you're not referring to that person, you've made a mistake.
Right.
It always has to be the closest name, right?
Right.
And when you are using many names, best if you don't use pronouns, best if you actually use the names. But if you're going to use pronouns, that you go backwards from the pronoun and the very first name, you better be referring to that person. If not, it's a missed pronoun reference, right? Just as an example. Exactly.
Right. That's
I have a question for you about sentence fragments.
Okay.
Well, yes. People use sentence fragments when they shouldn't. But when we're being creative, are there times when you believe sentence fragments are okay?
Well, I know that some of the famous authors get by for using sentence fragments all the time. But my advice is, until you get to be famous, you need to not use sentence fragments because it makes you look like you don't know English very well. But some of the big time authors, they get by with it all the time and it's acceptable. I'm not at that level, so I try never to use a fragment. That'd be my advice. Unless you're famous, you need to stick with the basic stuff. And when you write resumes and you write letters of applications,
right,
and reading that may not agree with sentence fragments, and you just are looking for problems. So just leave those things like that out and write formal English, and you're a lot better. Like I would suggest never to end a sentence with a preposition in a formal letter, although informally you do it all the time, and I do it myself when I talk. But if I'm writing a letter for a journal article, I try never to end a sentence with a preposition or start a sentence with a preposition, because back years ago that was not permissible, but now it kind of is. But that's my advice.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And to distinguish business writing and formal writing from creative writing. In creative writing, if you're using a sentence fragment as you're doing it on purpose, and it's a fragment, and you're doing it for effect, then okay. But if you're doing formal writing, then stay away from that. Yeah. So little story. My daughter, my youngest daughter, took a linguistics course, her first linguistics course in university. She's first year university last year. And she came home and told me that it was okay to end a sentence in a preposition. I went, what? No, it's not. I studied linguistics way back when. No,
Right.
it's not. She says, no. My linguistics professor says it's okay. And I'm like, okay, well, times have changed then, right?
You know, a few years ago, it actually came out in style manuals that you could do that now.
Yeah,
I was shocked
exactly.
whenever it came out, but yeah,
Yeah.
that is true. But I still don't recommend it in formal writing to do that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah.
So, um, do you have could give us one story, capital at the beginning, period at the end. What are some other? Do you have any other like worst writing stories? Don't do this
Well,
stories.
I'll tell you another story that I was a superintendent and I had a position open for a principal, and a guy I knew was a principal in a neighboring district, and I knew him, and he said he was kind of interested in my job there, and he said, "What I need this? Well, we need to get your credentials sent to me and a letter of application, and send that to me." And he did. And when I got his application letter, it was pathetic. He had all kind of typos, misspelled words, and he must have had 10 of them on a single page. And so I didn't call him back. And a few days went by, and he called me and he said, "You get my letter?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you're going to have me come for interview?" I said, "I hate to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you this. Your letter was so full of errors and corrections that you're not even going to get an interview." And he said, "But you know me." I said, "I know, but you didn't even take the trouble to proof it and get it correct. And so I'm just not going to interview you." So I made him mad. But in that case, it cost him an interview and potentially a job because he's a nice guy. He just, I'll tell you another quick story. I had a principal when I was teaching at Illinois State because I taught school law, and we had a principal in a large high school with I don't know how many English teachers and students. And he wrote a paper on school law and sent it to me, and it was pathetic. I had it full of all kind of errors and stuff. So I called him, and he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Your paper is terrible." And he said, "Well, I did the best I could." I said, "Well, I'm going to give you a do-over." He said, "Okay." And I said, "What, you have any English teachers in that school?" And he said, "Yeah, we got some." I said, "Are any of them any good?" "Oh, yeah." I said, "You need to make an appointment with one of them, take him or her out, buy them a steak dinner, and have them proof your stuff and then send it back to me." Boy, he says, "That permissible?" I said, "Absolutely." So he did. And that time it was a whole lot better. And he passed and went on and got his PhD. But he was so bad and he didn't take the trouble to get someone else to proof it. And it cost him a steak dinner or whatever. So
Oh,
it does make a difference.
yeah,
My grandmother had a saying, your name goes places your face never sees. And your writing is the same way. You submit things writing, and that's the first impression. And you don't get a second chance a lot of times to make
yeah,
a second impression. If it's all full of errors, it's not good. It
yeah,
doesn't bode you well for any jobs that you're going for.
yeah. So, as someone who has done a lot of writing. I mean, you got a PhD, you've got a couple of master's degree, you've got
Right?
four or five degrees, right? You've
Five.
5 degrees. You've been in the education system for so long. So someone who has obviously been a prolific writer, how do you write faster? How do we get our books done faster?
That's a good question. When I saw that part, I would say a couple things. You need to find a mentor that is good in writing and ask that person to help you. That's one thing. Another thing is, years ago, after I got out of the university, retired, I started a writing group. And that's another thing that I would highly recommend, to get in some type of a writing group and have each other critique your work and give you suggestions, and find some people who have written several books. We were lucky in our writing group. We had one lady who'd written 20 books, another guy who'd written 10, and they were excellent book people, and they would give us suggestions. I learned a ton of work on that. So uh, practice, get a mentor, get in writing groups, and work at it, and you will get better. But it's kind of like the guy playing golf. If you don't hit the golf ball correctly and you get a hook, unless you change that, you can practice, you're still going to do the hook. So you got to find out what you're doing wrong, and you got to be able to accept criticism. That's hard sometimes to do. We don't like criticism, but if you have a person who's really good and good in English and can help you, you can learn a lot from them. So that's the only way I know is practice, right, and get better.
Yeah. And just a little tip for people out there, around criticism, because when I edit, I'm very aware that sometimes people feel really sensitive.
Right,
And I like to differentiate, I'm not criticizing your ideas. I'm not saying you are wrong. This is not personal to you, and
right,
not even about your ideas. I want to help you express your ideas better in a way that is really going to resonate with people.
right.
And so when you're a writer and you're working with a mentor or a coach or an editor, just remember that they don't think your ideas are bad or you're bad. They're just helping you get better at expressing yourself, right? And sometimes I have to talk to my clients about the difference,
Yeah.
because I'm very, I really want to help, and so here are lots of ideas, and that can really just feel like I've just gone slap slap slap, and it's not what I'm doing. It's not about you. I'm just helping you express your ideas better, just to throw it
but
out there.
but we all can improve, and I
Yes.
mean, every time I write something, I hopefully write it better, and I think about things I've done in the past that's wrong, and I try to change them. I still make mistakes, but hopefully I don't make as many. And I think that's the
Yeah.
key is to keep writing and keep improving, and take
Yeah.
classes and go to writing places and get
Yeah.
people who are coaches and editors to help you do that, and accept that criticism with. Oh, I can do better, and I appreciate it instead of being upset about it. I know it's hard. I don't like to
Yeah.
be criticized. No one does, but
Yeah.
that's the way I know to get better is you got to be willing to
Yeah.
take
And
criticism and improve.
yeah, and
Yeah.
understand it's not about you. It's
No,
about
right.
yeah. So how do we become better writers? How do we become more accurate writers? Some suggestions for people out there who, like, I'm writing. I want to write more accurately.
Well, I think one thing on the research too, when you do your research, I think you need to take good notes and you need to cite your things and so forth, and no, not plagiarize, but and so you have good material. I think that helps you write better too. And
Yeah.
so I would recommend that. I spent a lot of research on this second book, and it's on how to study smarter, not harder. And I've got
Mm.
all kinds of tips on how to study. I've got one of the first ones is a real simple one. Don't study stuff you already know. You're wasting your time. Study stuff you don't know.
Right.
It's a simple thing, but I know people just study hours and hours and hours. And I say, well, don't you know it? Yeah, but I just got to keep studying. No, if you already know it, you don't need to keep studying. And one of the best things I do is use note cards. And I'm a big flashcard note card person. And
Yeah.
that's one of the best ways I know to recall facts and so forth. But there are several other tips in there. There are several different ways to improve studying with doing it smarter, not harder.
Yeah. So yeah. So tell us a little bit more about this new book. I'd love to hear more about it. It's study smarter, not harder,
Right?
and it's helping. Is it college students?
It's again from middle school all the way up to graduate school because all of us have to do some amount of studying, even if you get in and as an adult. One of the chapters in the book is advice from experts. And what I've done is contacted about 30 people from professors, teachers, a doctor, a CPA, let's see who else, several different professionals, and asked them, what did you use as a practical tip to study in college to help you be more successful?
Mm.
And I got a lot of good tips, and they're practical tips to actually use. So that's going to be a chapter in it. There's other chapters on things like note cards and things like, let's see, what's another couple topics that we have in there? Have you ever read the book called, let's see, it's The First 20 Hours? You ever heard of that book?
Mm. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's a good book. It talks about 20 hours, how to be a better, learn things. And there's a place in the book that talks about if you want to be an expert, a really, really good expert, you had to spend 10,000 hours in work and study to be really an expert. But
Yeah.
in 20 hours, you can become pretty good. So this is an interesting book. So that is another thing I'm going to put a little bit in the book about is that you do have to put some time in, but you do have to do it wisely. And you need to do it over an intermittent schedule where you do it over a week or two, where you do 30 minutes at a time. You take a 5-minute break. You never study over a couple hours a night, and you do it on a sequential basis. And there's all kind of tips like that that are simple tips that will help you remember things a lot better.
Yeah. And so we have a question from a viewer in just a second, but I just wanted to ask you one more question about this topic. So I look at it. There's two things. Like my kids used to use like those cue cards, flashcards,
Nice
when they
guy.
had to memorize something. It was really, really good for like getting like memorizing stuff. But there
Right.
are other times, like, for example, in math, when yes, you have to memorize the formulas, but you also need to be able to apply concepts.
Right.
So how do you study to memorize versus how do you study to like apply concepts?
Well, I'll tell you one of the best things you can do, in my opinion, is don't memorize the exact definition of things. Put it in your own words. And
Mm-hmm.
the concepts and all that stuff, rewrite those in your own words, even on note cards.
Yeah.
Don't put the exact definition of the term or the concept on the back. Redo that and put it in your own words so you understand it, because you're going to remember it better and you're going to understand it better. And one of the best things you can do is to teach each other the concepts, form little study groups and so forth, where you teach things and other people teach things and you teach each other. Because to teach something, you have to know it pretty well. And that enables you to teach someone else. And by having your peers explain to you, when I taught chemistry, one of the things I used to do was in balancing equations and stuff, we had chalkboards throughout the room, and I would put the kids up at the chalkboard and I'd give them equations to balance, and I would walk around to the kids and help them on the chalkboard individually. And I had some kids that were really good that would also help the kids. So they would explain to these kids peer to peer as to how to balance these equations. And frankly, they were better teachers than I was. So those are things you could learn how to teach it to people and actually teach it to people. Put things in your own words that you understand, and you still memorize some things, but you do memorize and learn the concepts, because the concepts are what's important, especially in math. There's a thing called interweaving. And in interleaving, you study one subject for a certain amount of time, and then you study another subject for a certain amount of time, and they help complement each other. There's all kind of different techniques in the book but the main thing I found is put things in your own words so that you'll memorize, you'll know them better, and be able to explain them better. Hello, I've lost your.
Pardon me.
I've lost.
There I am. Very
Yeah.
sorry about that.
Okay.
What I learned that really works at work too. So, if I'm working on a task and I get tired of that task, switching tasks and switching tasks and switching tasks can really help. Not to switch them too quickly, but to switch them. All right, we have a question for you.
Okay.
Emmy, you has asked, what would your advice be for writing in a conversational style? So you're not writing a formal textbook. You're writing a book to, let's say, parents on how to parent, and you want it to be more informal, more conversational.
Well, what comes to mind is the old KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid, because you want to keep things simple, because most people, I'm not sure, but I've been told that most people have a sixth, seventh, eighth grade reading level. And that's one of the problems. So you want to keep it simple for people. And if you make it too complicated and too complex, they're going to tune it out. So keep it simple and keep it short. I think that'd be the best thing. And not get into long sentences, make short, medium-sized sentences and mix them up. So that would be that. Now, one of the things that I used to tell people is that one of the things is you need to be able to read. Those people who can read succinctly and quickly and correctly tend to do very well in school or anything else they do. And you can learn how to do that. Speed reading is one way, but there are other ways you can learn. And I'm going to put a section in the book about how to read a chapter in 5 minutes and do it correctly and quickly.
Wow. I'd like to be able to read a chapter in 5 minutes. Does it depend how long the chapter is?
Well, of course, the longer the chapter, the longer it takes. But you can read
Right.
a record chapter in 5 minutes by just doing a couple things. Read the first sentence in each paragraph.
Yeah.
And if you understand what the paragraph is, just skim through the chapter or that
Right.
paragraph, then go to the next one. Look at all the bold headings and all the pictures and stuff, and look at those, because a lot of times a picture's worth 1,000 words. And then if
Yeah.
they have a summary in the back of the book, go back and read that. And you can do all that in about 5 minutes. And the
Yeah.
concepts are in that summary. They're in the bold print, italics, and you don't have to read the and all that stuff. You can just skip that.
And, when you say that, that's really interesting. Read that first sentence in the paragraph. And if you understand what the paragraph is about, skip it. So when you're writing books, that first sentence in your paragraph needs to explain what the paragraph is about, so that people can get through your book quickly, right? So I just want to flip that around for writers, Bill.
And that's the old 5-paragraph essay. You remember the 5-paragraph essay?
Yes.
Yeah, they don't teach that, suppose, anymore, but they really do. There's an introduction. There's 3 or more paragraphs. There's a conclusion and a call to action. And that's the old 5-paragraph essay. Some people leave some of it out. And like we said earlier, some of the famous writers, they kind of leave parts of it out, but they get by with it. But it's real important, I think, to have a topic sentence in each paragraph. Real important to have a thesis statement at the first of the chapter as well, to tell us what you're going to do. And it's just organized. It just flows better. That's my opinion.
Exactly. Excellent. So if you're looking for more information about Bill, you can find it on writewellrightnow.org. That is also linked in the description. Or if you want to connect with him directly, you can connect with Bill at noterings@gmail.com. Bill, have we missed anything really important today?
I see I left something out of that one. That it's note card rings. There's a D between the rings and the note card. So sorry about that. I missed that. I just happened to see it now.
It's note card rings. All right, let's do that again. If you'd like to connect with Bill, you can do so at notecardrings@gmail.com. Bill, have we missed anything really important today?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate the opportunity to come on, and hopefully this will help some people do better in school, because we're just getting out of COVID, and a lot of kids have been on what would you call it, home instruction, and a lot of parents are frustrated, kids are behind. So this how to study will help them when they start back with their school. If they'll follow those suggestions, they'll do better in school. Promise.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much, Dr. K. Thank you so much for coming today. Really appreciate all of your advice. Out there, if you're watching live, if you're watching on the replay, you can become a faster and better writer. Practice, get a mentor, join a writing group, and connect with Bill. We will see you all next Thursday. Have happy writing until then.